3 days ago, American warships seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. The president called it the largest tanker ever captured. Venezuela called it piracy. Russia demanded an explanation. And suddenly, the Caribbean feels like the most dangerous place on Earth. But here's what almost nobody is telling you. This exact scenario has already happened before. Same country, same accusations, same warships in the Caribbean. Same global powers circling Venezuela like sharks around wounded prey. The year was 1902, and what happened next nearly triggered a world war. Most people have never heard this story. It's been erased from American textbooks, buried in European history, forgotten because it doesn't fit the clean narrative of how global power supposedly works. But if you want to understand what's happening in Venezuela right now, you need to understand what happened 123 years ago. Because history doesn't repeat itself, but it absolutely rhymes. This is the story of how 3 European empires invaded South America, how one American president stopped them with a single threat, and how that forgotten crisis created the world order we are still living in today. It begins with a dictator, a mountain of debt, and a decision that brought the most powerful navies on Earth straight to Venezuela's doorstep.
In 1899, a man named Cipriano Castro marched out of the Andes Mountains with just 60 soldiers. Only 60. 3 months later, he controlled all of Venezuela. They called him the Lion of the Andes. The American Secretary of State called him something else entirely, a crazy brute, probably the worst of Venezuela's many dictators. And Venezuela had seen plenty. Castro had spent 7 years in exile, hiding in Colombia, running illegal cattle operations, building a private army, waiting for the government in Caracas to collapse. When it finally did, he seized the moment. He crossed the border with a tiny force and somehow fought his way to the capital. But conquering Venezuela was the easy part. Running it was a disaster. Years of civil war had shattered the economy. The treasury was empty. The tax system barely functioned. And Venezuela owed money to almost everyone. British banks, German investors, Italian merchants, French companies. During the good years, they had financed railways, plantations, and government loans. Now they wanted their money back. Castro didn't have it. Coffee exports collapsed. Customs revenues barely fed the army. So Castro made a choice that would change history. He ignored the debt. British diplomats sent formal requests, 17 of them. Castro ignored every single one. German investors demanded compensation for destroyed factories. Castro told them to sue. In Venezuelan courts he controlled, the verdict was always the same. Venezuela wins. Foreign creditors lose. And when companies protested, riots conveniently erupted, their warehouses looted, their businesses destroyed. The message was unmistakable. Venezuela's debts were Venezuela's problem. And if Europe didn't like it, Europe could go to hell.
By 1902, patience in Europe had run out. Britain was still the most powerful empire on Earth. The Royal Navy ruled every ocean. When Britain demanded payment, nations usually paid. But Venezuela wasn't paying. In London, investors were furious. The press demanded action. Why couldn't the mighty Royal Navy collect a simple debt from a weak South American state? Germany had its own reasons. In 1902, Germany was a rising empire with something to prove. Kaiser Wilhelm II wanted global respect, and Germany had deep financial interests in Venezuela. German merchants dominated Venezuelan trade. German banks financed railways. German citizens had been caught and killed during Venezuela's civil wars. The Kaiser wanted his money. More importantly, he wanted the world to see German power projected far from Europe. So Germany made a decision. Force would be used. But Germany couldn't act alone. Any European military action in the Western Hemisphere risked provoking the United States and its Monroe Doctrine, America's 70-year promise to block European interference in the Americas. So Berlin approached London. What if they acted together? What if the 2 most powerful navies on Earth combined forces? Britain hesitated at first. They valued their relationship with Washington. They didn't want to antagonize the United States. But Castro's continued defiance became embarrassing. 17 ignored diplomatic notes. No negotiations. No payments. In August 1902, Britain and Germany reached an agreement. They would blockade Venezuela. They would seize Venezuelan ships. They would capture ports if necessary. But they promised one thing. No permanent occupation, no colonization, debt collection only. In December, the ultimatum would be delivered, and the warships would sail. Europe believed this would be a short, controlled operation. They had no idea they were walking into the most dangerous diplomatic trap of the century.
At this moment, everything hinged on one man, the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was not an anti-imperialist. He believed in power. He believed in strength. And he believed that nations who refused to meet their obligations invited consequences. In fact, just months earlier, Roosevelt had made his position very clear. If any South American country misbehaves toward any European country, he said, let the European country spank it. This shocked people then, and it still does today. Roosevelt believed discipline was sometimes necessary, but there was one absolute limit. No European power would be allowed to seize territory in the Western Hemisphere. Temporary punishment was one thing. Permanent presence was another. That was the red line. And here's the contradiction that terrified Washington. A blockade could easily turn into occupation. Debt collection could turn into colonization. And once European troops set foot on Venezuelan soil, the Monroe Doctrine meant America would be forced to act. Publicly, Roosevelt accepted Britain and Germany's assurances. Privately, he prepared for war. While European diplomats talked, American warships began gathering quietly in Puerto Rico. Officially, they were conducting winter exercises. Unofficially, they were preparing for the unthinkable. The man commanding them was Admiral George Dewey, the hero of Manila Bay, the most famous naval commander in America, and a man who openly despised Germany. Dewey had already nearly fought German warships once before in the Philippines. Now, he was sailing toward the Caribbean. Roosevelt didn't issue threats. He didn't send public warnings. Instead, he let Europe move first and waited, because if Germany crossed that line, America would respond instantly.
On December 7, 1902, the ultimatum arrived in Caracas. Britain and Germany demanded immediate payment of Venezuela's debts. They demanded international arbitration. They demanded compensation for damages to European citizens. President Cipriano Castro had 48 hours to respond. He responded by doing nothing. Castro believed the United States would protect him. He believed the Monroe Doctrine was an iron shield. He believed Europe would never dare attack a nation in the Western Hemisphere. He was wrong. On December 9th, the blockade began. British and German warships took positions along Venezuela's coastline. Within hours, they seized 4 Venezuelan gunboats. 3 of them were destroyed by German forces without warning. The Venezuelan Navy ceased to exist in a single afternoon. Caracas panicked. Castro had assumed American intervention would be immediate, but Washington remained silent. No protests, no ultimatums, no visible response. Then the situation escalated further. On December 11th, Italy joined the blockade. Now 3 European powers surrounded Venezuela by sea. 2 days later, British and German warships bombarded Fort San Carlos, the fortress guarding Lake Maracaibo. Shells slammed into Venezuelan defenses. Buildings burned. Soldiers were killed. Still, the United States appeared to do nothing. To Castro, it felt like betrayal. To Europe, it felt like permission. But beneath the surface, something far more dangerous was happening. Because while Venezuela was being crushed and Europe believed America had accepted the blockade, the United States was preparing a response that no one would see coming.
While Europe bombarded Venezuela, Theodore Roosevelt was fighting a very different war. Not with ships, not with guns, but with threats that would never appear on paper. On November 24th, 1902, Roosevelt hosted a private dinner at the White House. The guest list was deliberate. Baron Theodor von Holleben, Germany's ambassador to the United States, and Admiral George Dewey, the most famous naval commander in America. Dewey was not just a symbol. He commanded the most powerful American fleet ever assembled, quietly gathering in Puerto Rico under the excuse of winter exercises. Roosevelt wanted Germany to see him, to feel the implication. A few days later, just before the blockade began, Roosevelt summoned the German ambassador again. This meeting was not diplomatic theater. Roosevelt made his position unmistakably clear. Germany must accept international arbitration. Germany must not seize Venezuelan territory. Germany must not establish a permanent presence in the Western Hemisphere. If Berlin refused, Admiral Dewey would sail, not as a warning, not as a show of force, but to ensure, by action, that Germany did not touch Venezuelan soil. This was not bluster. It was a direct threat of war between the United States and Germany. The ambassador was stunned, and then he made a catastrophic mistake. He chose not to report Roosevelt's ultimatum to Berlin. He believed the American president was bluffing. He believed Germany's power would force Washington to back down. He was wrong, and the clock was now ticking towards something far more dangerous.
On December 14, 1902, Theodore Roosevelt met the German ambassador for the final time. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just a calm statement of fact. If Germany did not accept arbitration within hours, not days, the American fleet would sail. There would be no formal declaration, no diplomatic paperwork, no warning shots. German warships would simply find themselves facing the United States Navy in the Caribbean. The ambassador finally understood. This was not negotiation. This was an ultimatum. That night, an urgent message crossed the Atlantic. Berlin was forced to choose between pride and survival. Germany's navy was powerful, but it was concentrated in European waters. America's fleet was already positioned in the Caribbean. Any conflict would happen far from German supply lines, with Britain quietly backing away from the alliance. Germany would stand alone. On December 17, 1902, the decision was made. The German ambassador returned to the White House, smiling. Publicly, Roosevelt praised Kaiser Wilhelm for his wisdom and commitment to peace. Privately, the message was unmistakable. The United States had drawn a line, and Europe had stepped back. This single moment changed everything. From that day forward, European powers understood that military intervention in the Western Hemisphere meant confrontation with the United States. 2 years later, Roosevelt formalized this reality into doctrine, the Roosevelt Corollary. America would act as the enforcer in the Americas, not to protect democracy, but to protect order. Venezuela paid its debts. The blockade ended. The war that almost began was erased from history. But the precedent remained. And more than a century later, as warships once again patrol Venezuelan waters, the echoes of 1902 are impossible to ignore. History didn't repeat itself. It simply waited.